What happens when the arteries of an empire begin to fail? Russia is facing a crisis that most people can't see, but everyone will feel. A crisis that's quietly strangling both the grocery store and the battlefield at exactly the same time. And the photographs that surfaced this summer showing steam locomotives chugging along Russian rails like ghosts from another century might not be the nostalgia trip they appear to be. They might be a confession. If you want to see how wars are really won and lost, hit that subscribe button right now. Tap the like button to help this reach more people, and share this with anyone who wants to understand what's actually happening behind the headlines. Let's dive in. Imagine a country so vast it crosses 11 time zones. A place where highways fade into dirt roads, where winter erases entire routes for months, and where moving anything heavy from point A to point B depends almost entirely on one thing: steel rails. Russia is that country. And right now, those rails are buckling under a weight they were never designed to carry. This isn't just about trains running late. This is about the fundamental architecture of survival in the largest nation on Earth starting to crack. In Russia, nearly half of all freight moves by rail. If you take pipelines out of the equation, that number jumps to 87%. Everything depends on this single network. The wheat that arrives at a Moscow supermarket and the tank rolling toward the Ukrainian front line travel on the same tracks, managed by the same state monopoly, fueled by the same strained system. The Russian military understands this dependency so deeply that they maintain an entire branch of their armed forces dedicated to railways. No other military in the world does this. It tells you everything about how Russia thinks about logistics. And now, the company that owns those tracks, Russian Railways, or RZD, is collapsing. Analysts in London recently summed up the situation in one brutal sentence. The company is virtually bankrupt. The numbers don't lie. RZD is carrying debt close to $52 billion, making it the third largest debtor in all of Russia. Profits that once flowed steadily into Kremlin coffers have evaporated. Freight volumes have cratered to levels not seen since 2009. Every single day, an average of 200 trains are canceled. 300,000 rail cars sit motionless, clogging the network like clots in a vein. And the government's solution? Raise prices. Again and again. Which only makes the problem worse. Those steam locomotive photos that went viral weren't part of some official announcement. Moscow didn't hold a press conference saying they'd run out of diesel and had to dust off equipment from the Stalin era. But in a country where diesel is rationed, where prices per liter triple in a single week, those images stop being funny. They start looking like evidence. To understand how Russia arrived at this point, you need to rewind just 4 years. Before the invasion of Ukraine, RZD wasn't a problem. It was a profit machine. Russia sat at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and RZD owned the bridge. Freight flowed west from China and east from Europe, and the monopoly collected fees at every stop. The company didn't need government bailouts. It expanded its own network using its own money. It was one of the few state giants that actually worked. Then Putin ordered the invasion. And geography, which had been Russia's greatest logistics asset, became a cage. Western nations slammed sanctions into place. Trade with Europe collapsed almost overnight. Lithuania cut or restricted transit routes to Kaliningrad, the isolated Russian territory on the Baltic Sea. Entire rail corridors that once hummed with container traffic fell silent. The gateways to the west sealed shut. The Kremlin's answer was simple on paper. Pivot to the east. Forget Europe. China will replace everything we lost. It sounded logical. China is massive, hungry for resources, right next door. But logic on a map doesn't always translate to reality on the ground. And the math, laid out clearly by Ukrainian economists, is unforgiving. In 2021, RZD moved 236 million tons of freight toward its western and southern ports. The eastern corridor, the one that opens toward China, had a capacity of only 144 million tons. Even after frantic upgrades, it barely reaches 180 million tons today. You don't need an economics degree to see the problem. The freight that can't go west physically cannot fit through the eastern door. It's like trying to drain a lake through a garden hose. The grand projects Putin promoted, the so-called New Silk Road, remain frozen. Not because of a lack of ambition, but because of a lack of money. And the income statement of RZD reads like a medical chart of a patient in free fall. In 2023, net profit stood at $1.48 billion. By 2025, it had collapsed to just $24 million. That's a 60-fold drop in 2 years. And in the first 7 months of this year, the company posted a net loss for the first time in recent memory. What consumed the profit? Mostly interest payments. Russia's central bank raised rates to fight inflation, and those rate hikes doubled RZD's annual debt service. The company now pays nearly $7 billion a year just in interest. That's more than most countries spend on their entire military. Forbes listed RZD among Russia's 3 most indebted entities back in 2024, and the situation has only darkened since. On the freight side, the decline has been relentless. 4 straight years of falling volumes. And when you break it down cargo by cargo, it becomes an X-ray of the entire Russian economy. Grain transport down by over 26%, cement down nearly 14%, construction materials down 13%. As the trains empty out, another trap becomes visible. More and more of what does move is coal, the cargo that pays the lowest rates. So the trains are running, but they're earning less per mile. It's a death spiral. We haven't even talked about management decisions yet, because some of those choices are almost darkly comedic. In 2024, RZD spent 1/8 of its entire investment budget not on new locomotives or track repairs, but on a 62-story skyscraper headquarters in Moscow, a gleaming tower while the rails rusted. When the company went to the government begging for help, asking for 200 billion rubles from the National Wealth Fund, the Ministry of Finance handed over just 65 billion, a third of what was requested. And every tariff hike meant to cover the shortfall only drives more customers away. Businesses that can afford it are fleeing to trucks, even though road transport is more expensive, because at least it's predictable. Every client that leaves makes the deficit worse, which forces another price hike, which drives away more clients. Round and round it goes. But a balance sheet only tells you half the story. The real crisis is in the metal and the flesh, the machines that pull the trains and the people who drive them. Before we go further, let's take a moment. If this analysis is hitting different than the surface level news you usually see, do me a favor. Pause for just 2 seconds and hit subscribe. You're not just supporting this channel, you're telling the algorithm that deep research matters. And if you've made it this far, drop a comment, even just one word. It helps more than you think. All right, let's keep going. RZD employs 851,000 people. It's the largest employer in Russia. And yet, the most critical positions are empty. Right now, the company can't fill 25,500 train driver jobs and 3,000 locomotive crew positions. These aren't office roles. These are the people who actually move the trains. Without them, nothing rolls. And this is the human reason behind those 200 daily cancellations. Why can't they find workers? 2 reasons. First, the front line. Wave after wave of mobilization has pulled thousands of railway workers out of their jobs and put them in uniforms. Track maintenance crews, repair specialists, drivers, they're gone. Second, money. The defense industry has skyrocketed wages to ramp up weapons production. A factory making artillery shells can offer salaries that RZD, bleeding cash and buried in debt, simply can't match. The average railway wage hovers around $1,500 a month. That might sound decent, but it's not enough when a munitions plant down the road is offering double. RZD's response has been to cut deeper. Mandatory unpaid leave for central office staff, then a reduction of 6,000 personnel, slashing 15% of the administrative workforce. They've set a target to save $950 million by cutting fuel and maintenance spending. Let that sink in. They're cutting maintenance on a rail network that spans the largest country on Earth. At the same time, they're recalling retired drivers, trying to replace the experience that walked out the door, but it's not working. According to reports from the field, drivers who operated analog Soviet-era locomotives 30 years ago are struggling to adapt to the digital, screen-controlled engines of today. It's like asking someone who drove a Model T to jump into a Tesla. And then summer arrived, and everything got worse. Ukraine's campaign to strike Russian refineries knocked diesel production down by 15 to 17%. Almost every major refinery in European Russia has been hit at least once or forced to cut output. By midsummer, fuel sales restrictions were in place in 55 of Russia's 83 federal regions. That's 2/3 of the country. But the real danger wasn't at the gas station. It was on the industrial spur lines. Most people have never heard of spur lines, but they're the circulatory system of the entire network. These are the short rail corridors that connect factories, mines, and quarries to the main railway. Over 80% of Russia's freight begins its journey on a spur line, and almost all of those locomotives run on diesel. In late July, the industry association that represents spur line operators went to the Ministry of Energy in a state of near panic. They reported that diesel prices had exploded from 60 rubles per liter to between 150 and 180 rubles in just 1 week. They demanded that the government manually allocate fuel priority at the ministry level because the market had ceased to function. And the language they used wasn't economic jargon, it was an alarm. They said this is a matter of survival for the industry. An energy economist from the Higher School of Economics delivered the verdict. It is technically impossible for spur line operators to switch to any fuel source other than diesel. There's no alternative, no backup plan. Either the diesel arrives or the freight doesn't move. And winter hasn't even started yet. Russia's northern territories rely on special winter-grade and Arctic-grade diesel. These fuels are chemically treated to function in temperatures where standard diesel turns into gel and locks up an engine. Only a handful of refineries can produce these specialty fuels, and they require specific equipment and additives. Even in normal peacetime years, winter fuel shortages have caused price spikes. But this year, for the first time in history, the summer window when reserves are supposed to be stockpiled coincided with a period when refineries were under attack. The coming months could be Russia's first true diesel winter of the war. And a locomotive that stalls at negative 40 degrees Celsius doesn't just cause a delay. It paralyzes the entire line behind it. Now let's talk about something that sounds boring but might be the most strategic component of this entire war. The cartridge-type tapered roller bearing. Stay with me. Russia's modern railcars, the kind that carry coal, steel, and military cargo with a 25-ton axle load, can't operate on old Soviet journal bearings. They need these specific high-precision bearings, and the three biggest manufacturers of these bearings in the world are Sweden's SKF and America's Timken and Amstead Rail. All three cut off Russia the moment the war started. They didn't just stop selling, they revoked production licenses. They halted the supply of the specialized lubricants and seals that keep those bearings alive. The impact was immediate. At the peak of the crisis, 10,000 railcars were pulled out of service due to lack of bearings. Over 200,000 railcars were placed on a risk list. Production of new railcars dropped by a fifth in a single year. Moscow scrambled to find replacements. They approved Chinese and Uzbek bearings. They signed contracts with domestic manufacturers to produce copies. But precision metallurgy can't be rushed. According to technical reports, some of the reverse-engineered Russian bearings began to fail, surfaces crumbling long before they should. And when a bearing overheats, trackside sensors automatically stop the train. The whole line locks up. The locomotive fleet is suffering the same fate. Modern Russian engines were built using German and Western components at critical points. Since late 2023, repair times have stretched longer and longer. Service companies admit they've lost access to specialized oils, patented bearings, electronic parts. The domestic replacements rushed onto the rails are breaking down over and over. One industry publication summarized it bluntly. At least 93% of the loading decline in Russia stems directly from locomotive shortages. Unable to get parts, the system has resorted to cannibalization. Operators are stripping parts from intact rail cars to keep others running. Leaked reports suggest that 15 to 20% of the strategic fleet is being dismantled this way. You're literally watching a system consume itself to survive. All right, real talk. If you're still with me, you're the kind of person who doesn't settle for headlines. You want the full picture. So here's a tiny ask. Comment the word railway down below. Seriously? It takes 1 second, and it tells me you care about this kind of deep content. Plus, it boosts this video so more people see it. Do it now, then let's keep rolling. Now add to this rotting system an enemy taking aim from the outside, and their weapon isn't a missile. It's a small metal box that sits beside the tracks, something most people don't even know exists. A relay cabinet. These cabinets are the electronic brains of railway signaling and track switches. When one gets torched, that section of track defaults to fail-safe mode. Trains stop. Movement can only resume with manual control at a crawling speed of barely 10 kilometers per hour. According to tallies by the Associated Press, over 145 acts of sabotage and arson targeting rail infrastructure have been recorded across Russia and connected lines in occupied zones. This isn't random vandalism, it's systematic. Analysis by irregular warfare experts traces the evolution. In the first year of the war, attacks were scattered, opportunistic. Now they're coordinated, deliberate, organized by Ukrainian intelligence, and executed by partisan networks inside occupied territories and by anti-war Russian citizens. One example stands out. In late March, a group called ARTERY torched a relay cabinet at a rail junction in occupied Luhansk. That junction feeds Russian forces on the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts. The group posted a statement saying the equipment burned completely and there will be no quick repair. What makes these strikes devastatingly effective is a feature baked into the Russian rail network itself. Single-track choke points. The BAM and Trans-Siberian railways, the corridors carrying the entire weight of Putin's pivot to Asia strategy, have critical sections with no alternative routing. Hit one relay box, and there's no way around it. So the system is breaking from within and being attacked from without. And the damage is being invoiced to two places: the civilian economy and the war machine. Let's start with the civilians. The Russian government made an official decision. Military freight takes absolute priority over everything else. Troops, tanks, ammunition, all of it jumps to the front of the line. And yet, even though military cargo has increased, industry analysts note it's a drop in the ocean compared to the lost civilian volume. Commercial freight, stuck waiting in the priority queue, flees to highways when businesses can't get an answer to one simple question: when will my shipment arrive? Look at what's vanishing from the rails. Timber down 18%, iron and steel down 8%, ores and coal down 5%. Overall freight loading is at its lowest point since 2003. And these aren't just statistics. They're the building blocks of an industrial economy quietly shrinking. The grocery supply chain felt it first. This summer, when fuel restrictions spread to 2/3 of the country and impacted 15 million people, the government made an extraordinary move. The Deputy Prime Minister announced that fuel priority would be given to trucks transporting food to major supermarket chains. Drivers would get special fuel cards. Think about that. A supermarket truck jumping to the top of the fuel priority list in a war economy. There's no clearer admission of how close the system is to breaking. An analyst pointed out this is the exact rationing model Soviet administrators used during food shortages. Russia isn't facing nationwide famine. Official food inflation is only about 3%. But there's a saying among energy analysts: food systems are energy systems in disguise. Diesel moves the grain, trucks move the produce, refrigeration carries the dairy. And when fuel distribution starts to collapse regionally, shelves go empty even if national stockpiles are fine. And that's exactly what's happening. Empty shelves and purchase limits in Crimea are the visible proof. Public transit fares have been hiked in at least 4 regions. Routes have been cut, and the central bank made an official admission. The drop in fuel production will hit economic growth. Russia's geography makes the pain unequal. The farther you are from Moscow, the harder you're hit. Fuel trains heading to Vladivostok face delays of up to 2 weeks because of bottlenecks in the rail network. In Zabaikalsk, gasoline has been sold by coupon for months, but the real alarm is sounding from the north. Millions of people live in Russia's far north, in places with no roads and no railways. They survive winter through an annual emergency operation called the Zavos. Every year before the waters freeze, fuel and food are shipped in and stockpiled. It's a narrow window. Miss it and people freeze. This year, the schedule derailed. The Arkhangelsk Regional Administration announced they couldn't guarantee delivery of the 21,000 tons of coal and 12,000 tons of diesel required for isolated communities. They declared they were on the brink of a state of emergency. If fuel doesn't arrive before the sea freezes, the boiler rooms shut down. The crisis that's managed with lines at the pump in summer will turn into something completely different in winter, when the thermometer drops to -40. The most acute suffering is in Crimea. The peninsula is enduring its worst logistical crisis since Russia annexed it in 2014. A state of emergency was declared in June. Fuel sales to civilians were halted entirely. Ukraine has simultaneously targeted all 3 supply routes: the Kerch Bridge, sea shipping, and highways. Military cargo traffic collapsed by 71% in 2 weeks, according to monitoring data. And then the chain reaches the front. Ammunition might be manufactured, might be loaded onto a freight car. But while the locomotive waits for replacement parts, while the rail line is locked down by sabotage, while the train driver has quit for a job at a tank factory, that shell is useless. It might as well not exist. An artillery round, sitting motionless 300 kilometers from the front, has a strategic value of exactly 0. This is a good moment to pause. You've made it deep into this story, and that means something. So here's the deal. Share this video with one person. Just one. Send it to someone who thinks they understand what's happening in this war. Because the real war isn't just trenches and drones, it's this. The invisible collapse of the systems that make war possible. Hit that share button. All right, let's bring this home. Has Russia seen this before? Yes. 3 times. In 1917, Moscow needed 120 railcars of grain per day to feed the city. Only 1/6 of that was arriving. Bread was rationed. The streets erupted. Academic historians agree that railway chaos played a significant role in igniting the February Revolution. The 300-year-old Romanov dynasty collapsed in part because the trains stopped running. Then came the Civil War. Rail lines became weapons. Bridges were blown. Locomotives turned into scrap. The Bolsheviks, after seizing power, spent years rebuilding the network. In the 1990s, the system faced its deepest peacetime crisis. Investments halted. Salaries went unpaid for months. Railway cities became ghost towns. What makes today so chilling is that it carries the DNA of all 3 crises at once. The burden of war, the starvation of parts and investment, financial collapse, all happening simultaneously. And even in 1991, the state had peace ahead of it. Time to rebuild. Today, every resource on those tracks competes with the war for funding. In Russia, the railway is a regime indicator. The people in the Kremlin know this better than anyone. So can Putin stop this collapse? Ars D is 100% state-owned. The intent is clear. The monopoly will be saved at all costs. But leaked internal government assessments admit a dark truth. Every tool they have could backfire, and the evidence supports that. Tariff hikes are the easiest lever to pull, but every price increase crushes industries like coal and drives customers to highways, worsening the revenue gap instead of closing it. Austerity measures are in place, but raising wages by 10% against inflation running even higher only makes the worker shortage worse, not better. The most creative idea was a debt-for-equity swap. Creditors would forgive 400 billion rubles of debt in exchange for ownership stakes. But the head of VTB, one of Russia's largest banks, rejected it. And analysts pointed out the plan didn't eliminate risk. It just spread it across the banking sector. What's left? What's selling assets? And here's the irony. The government has now ordered RZD to sell that 62-story skyscraper they built with money meant for locomotives. They're also selling shares in freight subsidiaries and historic stations. The anticipated total revenue is about $2.4 billion. That doesn't even cover a third of the company's annual interest payments. Subsidies are trickling in, but they're a fraction of what's needed. A massive 1.3 trillion ruble aid package has been stuck in bureaucratic limbo for months. And the final analysis, published by the Riddle think tank, sits atop all of this like a tombstone. None of these measures address the collapse in demand. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's emergency reserve, is expected to run dry by 2026 or 2027. The result is a paradox. RSD is too big to fail but too expensive to save. Every ruble Putin diverts to the railways is a ruble taken from the war. If he prioritizes the war, the rails continue to rot. And if the rails collapse, the war becomes unwinnable. So here we are. A $52 billion black hole swallowing the artery that feeds both Russian society and the Russian war machine. Steam locomotives appearing on 21st century tracks. Relay cabinets burning in the night. Diesel rationed like it's 1942. Workers fleeing to munitions factories, bearings crumbling, trains sitting idle, supermarkets getting fuel priority, and winter coming. This is what collapse looks like. Not a single dramatic explosion, but 1,000 small failures compounding system by system until the whole structure starts to sway. The war in Ukraine isn't just being fought in trenches. It's being fought in relay cabinets, bearing factories, fuel depots, and the cabs of locomotives that no one knows how to fix. And Russia is losing on all of those fronts at once. The question isn't whether this system can hold. The question is what happens when it doesn't.